The invasion didn't begin with words. It began with silence, and then with fire. The night sky over Earth changed in a heartbeat. One moment, stars glimmered quietly over cities and oceans, and the next, those same stars disappeared behind falling shadows. They came in the thousands, dark ships cutting through the clouds like blades through paper, their hulls glowing with red streaks from re-entry. The first thing people noticed wasn't the sound. It was the light. A soft orange glow bled through the clouds, spreading across entire continents as if someone had torn open the sky itself. One by one, power grids failed. Cities flickered out like candles in the wind. The world's largest communication hubs went silent. And from orbit, far beyond the reach of Earth's defenses, the Galactic Council watched everything in cold stillness. They had known this day would come. Not this year, not this decade maybe, but they knew. Humans were loud, unpredictable, and different. To the Council, Earth was a dangerous world, not because it was strong, but because it was impossible to control. But the Council had never interfered. They watched and waited, and now they were watching again as the invasion began. Not by their hand, but by another power. An empire that had conquered many worlds before. A species that believed Earth would be easy. From space, the first wave of invasion ships dropped through the atmosphere like knives. Their hulls shook the air. Their shadows stretched across cities. Sirens broke through the night in a few places, but most of the world stayed still, confused, frozen between disbelief and fear. Satellites burned out in seconds as EMP bursts cut across the planet. GPS went blind. Civilian communication lines died. The aliens moved with precision. They had done this before. They expected panic, they expected chaos, they expected the soft collapse of a species unprepared for a storm. But on the ground, in the quiet edges of darkened cities, humans didn't scream. They watched. Some looked to the sky with clenched fists, some ran toward shelters, some simply waited. But no one was begging. No one was kneeling. There were no live streams of surrender, no public broadcasts begging the invaders to stop. There was only silence. The kind of silence that comes when something bigger than fear is waking up. In the council chamber, the walls flickered with countless floating screens, each one showing a different angle of Earth's surface. New York's skyline going black, London's bridges swallowed by darkness, Tokyo's streets glowing faintly as emergency lights flickered. One of the elder council members leaned forward slowly, his voice breaking the silence. Why are they not reacting? His voice was low but uneasy. Another councillor, younger but sharper, shook his head. They are reacting, he said, his voice tight, just not the way anyone else would. The invading fleet spread across the stratosphere, enormous carriers unfolding like black steel wings, deploying smaller ships in waves. They blocked out the stars and covered the horizon. Their language was war, and they spoke it fluently. In every world they had conquered before, this was the moment when their enemies begged. It was the moment when they won. But Earth didn't give them that moment. No desperate signals. No surrender. Just a quiet darkness stretching over the world like a shroud. The first city hit was a coastal one. A shockwave of heat and light roared across the ocean as the invaders cut power stations and seized communication relays. They didn't even bother to fire on civilians. They didn't need to. Fear usually did their work for them. But here, there was no collapse. No open screaming. The streets went black, but beneath those streets, something moved. They didn't know it yet, but they had walked into a silence built on preparation. In a bunker far below a forest somewhere in Eastern Europe, a row of old monitors blinked back to life using a power source the invaders didn't know existed. Deep in a desert command post, men and women stood around a table, eyes cold, movements calm. In the high orbit above Earth, small human satellites flickered offline one by one, but others remained dark, hidden, waiting. A voice came over a radio in one of those bunkers. Calm, steady, they are here. Another voice answered, then it begins. The council feeds picked up the moment the first alien transport touched down on Earth's surface. They landed like they always did, confident. Heavy carriers slammed into the soil, kicking up dirt and smoke. Soldiers in black armor fanned out in formation, weapons raised, scanning streets with machines designed to detect heat signatures. They expected clusters of panicked humans. They found nothing. Empty streets. Quiet buildings. Only wind. The fleet commanders of the invasion force reported back to their mothership with confusion. No resistance detected. Cities abandoned. No military response. But in truth, the military response was already there. It was in the silence. Hidden bunkers. Shadow networks. Systems designed to vanish on purpose. The Galactic Council leaned in closer. For centuries they had called humanity reckless. Violent. Too unpredictable to trust. Too chaotic to control. And yet, in this moment, the chaos they feared had vanished. What they saw instead was a silence sharper than a blade. One counselor whispered, "Why are they so quiet?" Another answered, "Because they've been here before." Above Earth, in the dark side of orbit, an alien general gave the order to begin the occupation. Drop pods launched toward every major city. Heavy units marched toward centers of power. And still, no humans appeared. The invaders thought they had won without firing a shot. But down below, buried in layers of steel and rock, thousands of human eyes watched their every move through dark screens. No one moved early. No one fired first. Earth was letting them step in. And the Council realized it before the invaders did. It was in the stillness of the humans' movements. In the lack of panic. In the way they were waiting for something. The elder counselor gripped the armrest of his chair slowly. "They're not surrendering," he whispered. "They're setting the stage." For a race that had spent centuries studying Earth, the invaders had made the mistake of believing the loudest moments defined them. They had watched war footage, riots, politics. They thought humans were reactive, emotional, messy. What they had never understood was what happened when humans got quiet. What happened when their backs were against the wall and no one was watching. They didn't know that Earth had learned long ago how to fight wars where noise meant death. The invasion ships fanned out across the sky, spreading their net wider and wider, believing they were tightening control, but in reality, they were only stepping deeper into a place that had already made its decision. In hidden bases across mountains, deserts, oceans, and cities, power grids flickered silently to life. Old satellites came online in stealth mode. Railgun platforms disguised as weather stations rotated toward the sky. Silent submarines shifted position under the black waves. The first battle hadn't started yet, but the war already had. And the Council, watching from their distant chamber, felt something none of them had ever felt before while watching a planet fall: dread. The old ones among them had seen dozens of worlds conquered. They knew the pattern by heart. But this was no pattern they had seen before. The humans weren't broken. They were awake. High above the Earth, the invaders tightened their formation, unaware that the silence beneath them wasn't fear. It was a loaded gun, and someone's finger was already resting on the trigger. The Council members leaned closer to the screens, their breaths quiet, their hands tense, and one of them whispered the words no one else wanted to say out loud. "This won't end the way they think it will." Humanity had always been loud. It laughed loud. It fought loud. It lived loud. But when humans went quiet, history remembered what came next. And that night, as ships blotted out the stars and the invasion fleet spread its wings over the planet, the whole galaxy was about to learn that lesson. The invasion fleet moved like a storm swallowing the sky, black hulls cutting through the clouds, wings of war stretching over continents. Their engines roared like distant thunder as they tightened their formation and released their smaller ships in precise patterns. The alien generals expected panic to break the human defenses before a single shot was fired. They had seen it happen on dozens of weaker worlds before. Fear alone had always been enough, and from the control towers of their flagship they scanned Earth's surface with complete confidence. They saw no resistance, no sirens, no rushing armies, just cities sitting in the dark, quiet and still, and they mistook that silence for surrender. The first wave of landers struck Earth's surface with the force of falling meteors, their claws digging into the soil of the largest cities, command pods unfurled like black flowers, armored troops pouring out in perfect formation. Their helmets glowed in the shadows of abandoned streets, weapons humming with deadly energy. They expected screaming crowds, they expected chaos, they They expected humans begging at their feet, but what greeted them was emptiness. The sound of their own footsteps, the wind sliding through empty alleyways, the dark windows of buildings staring back at them like eyes that had already seen what was coming. At first they thought the humans were hiding because they were weak, that they had run into the shadows out of fear, but the seasoned invaders among them felt something different in the air, something colder, something that didn't belong to a terrified species, because on other worlds, fear had a sound. It was loud, messy, full of running and crying and gunfire. But here the silence was clean, too clean, and the ground itself felt wrong under their boots, too steady, too prepared. In orbit, the Galactic Council watched from their chamber, the feed streaming across their massive screens, their cold alien eyes studying every movement, and though they didn't say it out loud, some of them were starting to feel it too, that small, sharp pressure in the air that meant danger was waiting. The alien fleet commander gave the order to expand the perimeter. Columns of soldiers marched deeper into cities, scanning for life, hacking open doors, throwing light grenades into dark spaces. But there was no one there. The cities had been emptied like someone had swept the surface clean. Entire blocks silent, power grids disconnected, transportation lines shut down, no heat signatures, no life signs in the open, and that was wrong. Every experienced invader knew it, because human cities were supposed to be chaotic, full of movement, full of noise. But this was like stepping into a battlefield that had already been prepared long before they ever arrived. In a hidden council sector, far from Earth, an older counselor leaned forward toward the projection. His long fingers gripping the edge of the table, his voice low and rough. "They're not reacting like prey," he said, "they are waiting." Another council member, younger and less cautious, scoffed, "They are human. Their arrogance will get them killed. The invaders will crush them in a day." But his words rang hollow in the silence of the chamber. Every other counselor kept their eyes on the feed, because something was building down there. The alien forces pushed forward, claiming key landmarks with practiced ease. They raised their black banners on government buildings, towers, ports, rail hubs, all the places that mattered, and it felt too easy. One commander even laughed through the comms, boasting that the conquest would end before dawn. They didn't see that the ease was the trap. They didn't see that every inch of ground they walked on had already been chosen for them by someone who knew they were coming. As the second wave of landers descended, the first wave spread across 5 continents. Cities locked down under alien control, or at least that's what they thought. Drones scanned the skies, thermal sensors scanned the ground, but all they saw was a surface that had gone completely still. One commander reported with confusion, "No armed resistance detected. Civilian population missing. Possible mass evacuation underground." The fleet admiral on the flagship replied coldly, "If they ran, we'll find them. No species can hide from us. We've broken stronger worlds than this one." But this wasn't a world that had run. This was a world that had dug in. The humans weren't screaming because they didn't plan to. They weren't showing their armies because their armies were never meant to stand in the open. Somewhere deep under the crust of the earth, in tunnels built beneath old cities, in bunkers no satellite could see, the humans were already in motion. Old defense grids lit up quietly. Ghost satellites came online without broadcasting signals. Railgun launchers that had never appeared on any military registry powered up in silence. The aliens were celebrating a victory they hadn't actually won. They didn't know they were walking through cities wired with hidden eyes. They didn't know that every move they made was being tracked. The humans weren't reacting. They were recording, learning, surrounding. This was not a battlefield to them. This was a trap. The Galactic Council watched as more landers touched down, as alien troops fanned out, as giant armored walkers marched down human streets without facing a single bullet. Some of the counselors began to whisper in their own languages, their voices low, uneasy. They had seen wars before, many wars, but this one didn't look like any war they'd ever recorded. Something about the silence wrapped around the invasion like smoke. Something about the lack of resistance made even them nervous. On the flagship, the alien admiral smiled to himself, leaning back in his chair. "Pathetic," he muttered, "they couldn't even fight." But far beneath his ship, in the dark veins of the planet, a single human transmission moved across a secure channel, short and calm. It was 3 words, nothing more. They are inside. It was the signal. Not of surrender. Of beginning. In bunkers, men and women in black uniforms lowered their visors. In silent bases at the bottom of the oceans, submarines rotated their launch tubes toward the surface. Across hidden launch sites in mountain ranges and frozen plains, ancient silos that no alien scan had ever detected shifted quietly. This was not the reaction of a broken world. This was the quiet breathing of a predator that had allowed its prey to walk closer. The Galactic Council understood it just before the invaders did. One of the elder counselors whispered, barely audible over the hum of their systems, "This isn't going to end the way they think." But by then, the invasion had already sunk its claws into the surface. The invaders thought they were closing their trap around humanity. They didn't know the trap belonged to Earth. They didn't know they were the ones being surrounded. The sky was black, the cities were silent, and every step the invaders took carried them closer to the moment when the silence would break, not with screams, but with fire. The third hour of the invasion came, and what the aliens saw on their monitors was something they had never seen before. Entire cities stretched out before them, massive towers, long streets, rail networks, highways, everything exactly where it should have been. But there were no people. Not a single human. No cries. No civilians rushing to escape. No open resistance. Nothing. The world they had expected to crush had vanished overnight. And the silence was so thick that even the alien commanders, usually arrogant and loud, lowered their voices when they gave orders. They had invaded dozens of worlds before, broken proud empires, wiped out armies in hours, and every single time, they had been met with panic and noise, people flooding the streets, signals filling the air. But this time, Earth was giving them nothing, just quiet buildings staring back at them like hollow bones. Across the globe, their armored patrols advanced block by block, thermal scanners sweeping every corner, motion detectors searching for movement, audio sensors straining for the slightest human sound. They found none. Shops were locked, houses were empty, subways silent. Even the animals that usually filled human cities had vanished. They didn't know that this silence wasn't weakness. It was design. Humanity hadn't fled blindly into the night. They had disappeared with precision. Their cities were empty because they wanted them to be empty. The invaders thought they had cornered a frightened species, but the truth was they were walking into a battlefield that had already been stripped clean, like stepping into the kill zone of a hunter who knew where the prey would come. At first, the aliens laughed, calling it cowardice. They reported back to the flagship with mocking tones. The humans have abandoned their cities. This will be over before sunrise. But deep down, some of the veterans felt it. A strange pressure in their stomach, a sense that something wasn't right. Soldiers were trained to hear danger in the quiet, and this was the quiet of something that was waiting. They moved through empty streets like conquerors, planting their banners, deploying energy shields, setting up command outposts, unaware that every step was being tracked, every movement recorded. In the council chamber light years away, the councillors leaned closer to their holographic feeds, watching the alien troops move through the dead cities of Earth. And for the first time in their long history of observing invasions, some of them looked uneasy. One of the elder councillors muttered under his breath, "This doesn't look like a conquered world." Another answered, "It looks like a trap." But no one said it out loud to the invading force. They were not friends of Earth. They had no reason to warn them. But they knew enough of human history to recognize the shape of a storm. The alien commanders ordered their troops to move into deeper parts of the cities, into industrial zones, power grids, tunnels. That's where they started to notice the first signs. Doors welded shut from the inside. Transport stations stripped clean. Food stores emptied in an organized way. It wasn't the chaos of people running. It was the order of people preparing. It was too neat, too clean. "This isn't a retreat," one squad leader whispered on comms, his voice tense. "This looks like an evacuation plan." But before his superior could answer, the signal glitched. The underground networks weren't just empty. They were actively blocking scans. Every invasion force was trained to detect enemy presence by heat, noise, or movement. But here, Earth was invisible. And that made the soldiers nervous. They began to increase patrol frequency, setting up scan towers and motion sensors, But even those readings came back empty. An entire planet, 8 billion strong, had vanished like smoke. And then small things started to happen. Not explosions, not attacks, just things. A drone feed showed a street that was empty. Then the next second one of the alien patrol vehicles was gone. No sound, no blast, just gone. Another squad reported finding footprints in the dust on a rooftop, human boots, still fresh, but no one in sight. At an energy hub, 2 soldiers disappeared, their weapons left behind, still warm. The commanders barked orders to lock down the zones. But the more they tried to tighten their grip, the more it felt like the ground was slipping out from under their feet. The Galactic Council watched it all, silent and wide-eyed. They had known humanity was unpredictable. But this wasn't unpredictability. This was control. Silent, deliberate, patient control. And the counselors who had once called humans reckless now said nothing. The invasion force was being swallowed, not by war, but by absence. Inside one of the alien command ships, a young officer stared at the growing list of units marked out of contact. It wasn't huge yet, maybe a few dozen. But what made her hands shake was that every disappearance happened without warning. No alarm. No signal. Just sudden silence. She whispered to the captain, "This isn't right. They're here. We just can't see them." Beneath their feet, in tunnels carved beneath cities decades earlier, human operatives watched the invaders through black screens, tracking their routes with cold precision. Every move, every patrol, every ship landing was mapped out. They didn't need to attack yet. The longer the enemy felt safe, the deeper they would go. The deeper they went, the easier it would be to crush them. This wasn't panic. This was the opening act of something that had been planned for years. Above ground, the aliens kept advancing, confused and frustrated, shouting at each other in their harsh, guttural language. They thought they were searching for a broken enemy hiding in the dark. What they didn't realize was that they were the ones being hunted. The silence they mocked was the same silence their predecessors had once feared in other wars. Earth was a trap, and they were already inside it. In the council chamber, a long moment passed with no one speaking. One counselor finally broke the silence, her voice cold. "They don't know what they've walked into." An elder turned to her slowly. "They will," he said. On the ground, the alien patrols turned corners and vanished. The cities that had looked abandoned were no longer just empty. They were alive in ways the invaders couldn't see. They were breathing, waiting, watching. The sky above was theirs for now, but the ground below belonged to someone else. And the invaders were about to find out what happens when a species that doesn't scream chooses to strike instead. The world hadn't disappeared. It was right beneath them. And the silence that had unsettled the council was about to become the sharpest weapon humanity had ever used. The night stretched over the planet like a heavy blanket, hiding the things that moved beneath it. The alien fleet hovered above the world, confident in their power, confident in their numbers, their warships lighting the clouds with pale fire, their commanders believing that the silence of the humans meant victory. But that silence was never surrender. It was the quiet breath of a world preparing to strike back. And the first strike didn't come from the skies, it came from the shadows below. Deep underground, beneath empty streets and silent towers, thousands of human operatives sat in pitch-black control rooms, faces lit only by green screens, fingers hovering over switches and triggers they had spent years building, waiting for the exact moment when the enemy would be blind enough to bleed. The alien patrols had grown careless. They had marched through the cities without meeting resistance, they had planted their banners on rooftops, they had laughed in their harsh language and called humans cowards, but their laughter stopped the second their supply route in the north went dark, not with an explosion, but with a clean cut, like a knife slicing through a vein. A transport convoy of 12 armored vehicles simply vanished from their tracking system. One blink, then gone. The commander shouted through the comm channels, ordering his forces to investigate, but by the time they reached the last known location, there was nothing but burned tire marks, melted tracks, and a quiet street that looked like nothing had ever happened there at all. The same thing happened again an hour later on another route, then another, then another. One by one, their supply lines were cut like silk threads. Patrols that used to laugh now spoke in short, sharp bursts, their voices low, tight with something they hadn't felt in years, fear. Above, the Galactic Council watched the feeds with growing unease, because they had seen this pattern before, not in human wars, but in predator hunts. The prey makes noise. The hunter doesn't. Earth was not fighting like an army. Earth was moving like a ghost. The first alien unit to see the human fighters never got to tell anyone. A team of 6 soldiers walked through an abandoned subway tunnel, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was damp, cold, silent. One of them muttered something about humans being rats hiding underground. Another laughed. But before they could take 10 more steps, the lights flickered. A faint metallic click echoed from behind them. They turned, and saw nothing. Just the darkness swallowing the end of the tunnel. Then the first soldier's headlamp went out. Then the second. Then the third. The last thing anyone outside heard from them was a sharp, broken shout, and then the feed went black. Minutes later, human operatives moved like shadows over their bodies. Silent, fast, pulling their weapons, planting traps, leaving no trace. No symbols. No warning. Just darkness. By the time the next patrol arrived, it looked like their comrades had vanished into the air. The council feeds glitched as if the world itself was swallowing the invaders. One of the elder councillors whispered in his cracked voice, "They're not attacking in rage. They're hunting." That night, it wasn't Earth's armies in the open. It was the shadow units, old Black Ops programs that had been buried deep beneath governments, invisible even to their allies. They were the ones who trained for wars they hoped would never come. And now that it had, they moved like wolves in the dark. Their rules were simple. No mercy, no noise, no light. They didn't wear uniforms, they didn't shout slogans, they didn't wave flags. They came and went like smoke. Alien officers screamed at their subordinates through comms, demanding answers, demanding resistance, demanding something they could shoot at, but there was nothing to aim at. Their scanners picked up only empty streets. Their sensors found cold air and still concrete. Their men disappeared into alleys, tunnels, rooftops. They fired into the dark more than once, their glowing weapons lighting up corners where nothing stood. Panic crawled slowly through their ranks like frost. The council chamber grew quieter. No one was mocking humans now. One of the younger councillors finally spoke, her voice stiff. If they can't see the enemy, they can't fight them. The old man beside her nodded slowly. That's exactly the point. In a ruined district on the other side of the planet, an alien mech unit tried to secure a power relay, one of their heavy walkers standing guard, its cannons glowing hot, its scanners sweeping the dark for heat signatures. For 40 minutes, nothing moved. Then a single metallic sound cracked the stillness, a snap, barely louder than a twig breaking. The mech turned its cannons toward the noise, but it was already too late. From 3 separate rooftops, electromagnetic spikes launched silently. One hit its leg joint. One pierced the power cell. One shattered the optic unit. The giant walker shut down without firing a single shot. When its escorting soldiers turned to call for backup, they saw figures in black melt into the darkness. No faces. No sound. No mercy. And this happened not in one place, but in dozens. Across continents. In the span of 4 hours, 11 forward bases went silent, 37 patrol units vanished, 120 vehicles were either destroyed or stolen, and not a single human was captured. The aliens finally understood something they hadn't considered. Humans weren't waiting because they were scared. They were waiting because they had chosen the battlefield. By midnight, the alien fleet was still holding the skies, but they no longer trusted the ground. Their soldiers refused to patrol alone. They moved in tight formations, jumpy at every flicker, every gust of wind. Their nerves began to fray, and they started to turn their weapons on shadows. The council watched and they knew what this meant. The fear had begun. The alien admiral, who had mocked the humans earlier, slammed his fist against the console, shouting at his officers to push harder, to flush them out. But the more he shouted, the more nothing answered him. He was fighting an enemy he couldn't see, and deep down he knew it. One of his lieutenants whispered nervously, "Sir, they're not reacting like civilians. They're organized." Beneath their boots, in the invisible labyrinth of tunnels, human commanders listened to enemy chatter with quiet satisfaction. They didn't need to rush. The invaders were bleeding themselves dry. One strike at a time. One disappearance after another. This was the way humanity fought when it was outnumbered, when no one came to help. Not like prey. Like hunters. In the darkness, the humans whispered a single phrase over their comms, one that no alien could hear but that echoed in every corner of the underground: Phase 1, complete. And above, in their floating fortress, the alien fleet didn't even know that the real war had just begun. The silence that had confused them on the first day was now their worst enemy. The world they thought they'd conquered was still there, watching them, surrounding them, waiting to strike again. Earth had become a battlefield of shadows, and the invaders didn't even realize they were the ones trapped inside it. The alien fleet's confidence began to crack like thin glass under pressure. The silent cities that had once felt conquered were now growing teeth in the dark. The invaders held the skies, but the ground was no longer theirs. Every patrol that left the command posts returned thinner. Some didn't return at all. Supply chains were shredded like paper. And every time they tried to move in force, the shadows of Earth tightened around them. The alien admiral stood in the central control chamber of his flagship, glowing screens flashing red warnings one after another, commanders shouting over each other, reports of disappearing squads and silent bases flooding the comm lines. He slammed his hand against the table, snarling through his fanged teeth. Enough hiding. Flush them out. His second-in-command hesitated before answering, his voice shaking slightly. We've tried, Admiral. They're everywhere and nowhere. We don't even know what we're fighting. The Admiral gave the order anyway. A massive ground sweep. Full force. Every remaining battalion. Mechs. Walkers. Scanners. Drones. They believed raw power could fix what fear had broken. So at dawn, their engines roared to life, a wall of machines and soldiers marching down the streets of dead cities, a wave meant to crush the silence beneath it. But that was exactly what the humans were waiting for. Hidden in underground control rooms, command bunkers, and deep mountain silos, human leaders watched the invasion force spread out into neat formations, their movements predictable, their arrogance unshaken. One of the commanders whispered into the radio, his voice calm like still water. They're in position. Phase 2. Miles beneath the streets, massive steel doors opened, revealing railgun batteries that had been built in secret over decades, disguised as collapsed infrastructure and long-forgotten silos. Across coastlines, hidden naval fleets rose from the dark depths, silent submarines sliding through black water like sharks tasting blood. Drones that had played dead for days came online with no warning. Orbit wasn't safe for the invaders anymore, and the ground had already turned against them. The first strike hit their eastern formation, a single railgun shot slicing through the legs of a heavy mech like it was made of paper. Before the soldiers even turned their heads, a second shot followed, then a third, and the street erupted in molten metal and panic. Across the world, similar strikes erupted in synchronized rhythm, like a single heartbeat, perfectly timed. Hundreds of hidden launch points opened their mouths and spat fire into the invasion force. Armored transports exploded. Fuel convoys turned into fireballs. Their entire ground movement was caught in a web they hadn't even seen being built. The aliens fired back, but their targets were ghosts. The human defenses were buried too deep, camouflaged too well, moving too fast. Every time the invaders thought they found a firing point, they hit an empty building or a decoy drone. The trap wasn't built to stop them head-on. It was built to make them choke themselves. Their formations started collapsing from the inside, cut off from command, their comm towers fried by electromagnetic bursts coming from nowhere. In the council chamber, the tension was suffocating. They had expected to watch another simple conquest, another empire crushing a primitive world. Instead, they were watching a predator caught in its own net. It's coordinated, one counselor said softly. It's not just resistance. It's war. Another counselor, one who had studied human history, leaned forward slowly. No, he whispered, it's payback. On the ground, chaos tore through the invaders' ranks. A walker tried to retreat from the city center but collapsed when its leg was shredded by hidden mines. Drones fell from the sky when laser-guided bullets cut their engines in mid-flight. Troops tried to regroup, but the roads they had marched down were now traps. They led to nowhere but more fire. The humans weren't meeting them face to face. They didn't need to. They were carving their enemy apart like surgeons, piece by piece. Above Earth, the alien fleet adjusted its orbit, trying to stabilize the crumbling situation below. Massive carrier ships positioned themselves to provide air support, but the moment their cannons warmed, a sudden burst of static cut through their communications. Then the first of their orbital defense drones went offline. Then the second. Then entire sections of the fleet's communication network went dark. Human satellites, which the invaders had assumed were dead, came to life with silent fury, jamming, intercepting, blinding. The trap wasn't just around their troops. It was closing around their entire army. And then it happened. A single EMP wave detonated across the Pacific region, rolling through the atmosphere like a black tide, frying alien systems, shorting out drone networks, disabling mech units mid-step. Engines died. Lights flickered out. Half their sensors went blind. In one moment, their technological advantage collapsed. In that moment of silence, before panic could even fully rise, the humans struck again. From the dark corners of every city, human strike teams emerged like smoke, faces covered, rifles silent, steps measured. They didn't shout. They didn't announce themselves. They hit hard, fast, then vanished again. Dozens of alien officers were eliminated before their soldiers even realized they were under attack. Control towers fell without warning. Their secure landing zones burned. The fleet above Earth sent desperate commands to their troops, but half of them never received the message. The council members stared at their screens in disbelief. They had seen empires burn before, but never this way. Humanity didn't roar into battle. Humanity waited for their enemies to walk into the jaws of a trap they'd never escape. One of the counselors, the oldest in the room, leaned back slowly and whispered a single line. They didn't just defend their world. They designed this war. On the flagship, the alien admiral's voice cracked as he shouted for status reports. His officers stammered back fragments. Communications lost, ground units cut off, carriers jammed, thousands missing. The silence that once belonged to the humans now belonged to them. Their panic filled the airwaves. And somewhere underground, far from the chaos above, a human general watched the blinking red dots on his map disappear one by one. His voice was calm, cold, surgical. Phase 3 is ready, he said. Close the net. Above the darkened cities, alien warships began to lose their grip on orbit. Their soldiers on the ground were isolated, surrounded, blind. The invaders had believed Earth was sleeping. But Earth was awake now, and it was hunting them. The trap they thought didn't exist was already closed. And for the first time in a long time, the mighty invading force felt something they weren't used to: fear. The night sky over Earth had once belonged to the invaders. Their black ships had hovered like vultures circling over their prey, their engines humming with quiet confidence, their fleets blotting out the stars. But that was before the trap snapped shut. Now, as the sun began to crawl over the horizon, the sky didn't belong to them anymore. It was no longer silent. It was alive. The alien fleet had expected to hold absolute control above Earth. But as their ground forces collapsed below, something far worse was waiting above. The first blow came without warning. A beam of pure kinetic energy sliced through the belly of a carrier ship orbiting over the Atlantic, splitting its metal spine in half before it even registered the impact. No alarms, no warning, just sudden, violent silence followed by a fireball that tore through the clouds. Commanders screamed through the comms as the massive ship fell from the sky like a burning stone. Then a second strike hit another carrier over Asia. Then a third over the Pacific. And the aliens realized too late what was happening. The humans hadn't just built defenses underground. They had built them in orbit. Hidden platforms disguised as old, dead satellites came to life one by one, unfolding like steel flowers, revealing rail cannons and kinetic launchers that had been sleeping for years. Silent. Waiting. Ready. The sky that the invaders thought they owned was turning into a battlefield, and they were the ones at the wrong end of it. The alien fleet tried to respond fast, their defense grids flashing awake, but the humans were faster. They had studied their enemy for weeks in silence, memorizing formations, locating weak points. Now every shot landed with precision. Orbital defense stations hidden inside asteroid shells, disguised mining rigs, and long-range platforms positioned on the dark side of the moon began to fire in perfect synchronization. One after another, alien warships exploded in high orbit, lighting the morning sky with streaks of fire. The silence the invaders had used to dominate was now being used against them. On the flagship, the alien admiral grabbed the edge of the control console, his claws digging into the metal, watching in disbelief as half his fleet was wiped out in the first 20 minutes. "Find the source," he shouted, his voice raw with panic. Officers scrambled, scanning for human ships, but they didn't find ships, they found platforms. Dozens. Hundreds. Hidden in places they hadn't even thought to scan. They've had this for years, one officer whispered in shock. They were waiting for this. The council watched all of it unfold in cold silence. They had never seen humans fight like this. They had seen their wars before, loud, brutal, desperate, but this was different. This wasn't war driven by chaos. This was precise, calculated, controlled. One counselor leaned forward, whispering, "This isn't defense anymore. This is retaliation." Down on Earth, the human commanders moved like chess masters, giving orders in short, calm bursts. Every strike had been planned. Every angle calculated. Drones hidden in the upper atmosphere emerged from their camouflage, swarming like silver wasps, locking onto alien support craft. EMP warheads detonated above the fleet, frying sensors and shutting down navigation systems. One massive mothership lost its stabilizers and tilted downward, caught in Earth's gravity. It fell slowly at first, then faster, the air around it screaming as it broke through the clouds. It smashed into the ocean with a force that shook entire coastlines. The alien fleet tried to retreat, but even retreat required coordination. And they didn't have that anymore. Their comm systems were jammed. Their formations were broken. Their ground troops were cut off. They had no eyes, no ears, no way to understand what they were fighting. And the humans never showed their faces. No grand speech. No warning. Just the cold precision of a world that had prepared for this moment for a very long time. A squadron of alien fighters managed to launch into the sky, hoping to strike back at the orbital platforms. But before they could even reach the stratosphere, they were met by something no one outside of Earth had ever seen. Rising from hidden launch silos buried in mountains, cloaked warships, sleek, black, silent, slid into the air like hunters emerging from the dark. The invaders expected primitive aircraft. What they got was a fleet. Not as large as theirs, but deadly. The human warships didn't announce themselves. They simply fired. One alien fighter squadron vanished in a single burst of railgun fire. Another group tried to flank, only to be caught by anti-air turrets they hadn't detected before. In less than an hour, the skies that once felt untouchable to the invaders became a slaughterhouse. And for the first time, the alien soldiers on the ground heard their fleet, their mighty, unstoppable fleet, screaming for help. On the flagship bridge, chaos was complete. The admiral barked order after order, but no one could follow them. "We must retreat," someone shouted. "We can't retreat," another officer replied. "We're trapped." Because they were. Every retreat corridor they tried to open was cut off. Every signal they sent was intercepted. Every path led them deeper into the human net. The humans hadn't only defended Earth, they had built a cage in the sky. The council chamber was silent. Some of them were pale with fear. Others simply stared, stunned. For years, they had called humans reckless, unpredictable, dangerous. But now, as they watched fleets burn and orbital defenses crush what should have been an unstoppable invasion, they understood the truth. Humanity was all those things. Yes, but they were something else too. They were patient. And patience was far more terrifying than rage. On the ground, alien troops lifted their heads toward the sky and saw their fleet burning above them. The sound of their engines was gone, replaced by distant thunder as ships fell through the atmosphere. One soldier whispered something in their language that translated to a single, trembling word, impossible. But it wasn't impossible. It was human. It was the day Earth finally lifted its head and showed the galaxy that it had never been helpless. It had just been quiet. The alien admiral stared at the holographic projection of Earth's orbital map, blinking red where every one of his ships had fallen. His hands shook. He knew what was coming next. When the sky belonged to humans again, it wasn't just a defense. It was the beginning of the end. The humans had stopped waiting. Now, they were hunting. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. The war that the alien empire thought would end in a day was now ending in screams they could not silence. The fleet that had hovered over Earth like a black crown was gone, broken ships burning as they fell through the sky. The ground forces that had marched through silent cities were scattered and cut off. The orbital advantage that gave them confidence had been ripped away like paper in fire, and somewhere in the distant stars, inside the polished white walls of the Galactic Council chamber, powerful leaders sat in frozen silence, their wide eyes reflecting the flames of a war they hadn't started but had watched too closely. They had called Earth dangerous for centuries, but not because they thought it could win. They feared what it would become when pushed too far. And now, with the invasion turning into a massacre, they finally saw it with their own eyes. On their massive floating screens, the chaos of the alien fleet's destruction played in real time. Warships cracked in half like eggshells, breaking apart as gravity pulled them into the atmosphere. Massive carriers, once untouchable in orbit, screamed through the clouds like dying beasts. Escape pods shot out in streaks of light but were intercepted before they could land. Down on the ground, strike teams in black ghost armor moved like smoke through the ruins of alien positions, eliminating command posts, crushing communication hubs, pulling down banners that had barely been standing for a week. Earth was no longer defending itself. It was purging the invasion like a body removing a poison. The Galactic Council chamber was usually full of arrogance. They were the ones who watched, who ruled, who judged. But today there were no speeches, no debates, just the sound of quiet, heavy breathing. A young counselor finally broke the silence, her voice trembling. "They've taken the sky," she whispered. "In less than a day, they've taken it all back." An older one, with deep lines carved into his face, didn't look at her when he answered, "No, they didn't take it back. It was never theirs to lose. They were waiting for the moment to show it." The alien admiral on the flagship gave his last desperate order. His voice cracked with rage and terror. "Full retreat. All surviving ships. Break orbit." But his voice was drowned out by alarms. The retreat paths were already locked. Human orbital platforms had moved into a perfect net, cutting off every escape corridor. One by one, the remaining ships tried to punch through, and one by one they were torn apart, burning into the atmosphere, their black hulls leaving streaks of orange fire across the morning sky. The entire fleet that once promised to conquer Earth had turned into nothing but falling stars. Down below, human forces moved with frightening precision. Drones swarmed over alien positions, armored convoys rolled silently down highways they themselves had emptied at the start of the war. Railgun platforms fired without missing a shot, and underground command networks coordinated everything like a single living organism. No panic, no chaos, no mercy. Every strike was clean, fast, and final. Alien soldiers who once marched through cities like conquerors now ran through those same streets as prey, hunted through every tunnel, every alley, every dark corner they thought was safe. The same silence that had confused them on the first day was the weapon cutting their throats on the last. In the council chamber, someone whispered, "We should have warned them." Another snapped back sharply, "And what? Join them? Face Earth ourselves." Their voices died almost as soon as they rose. They all knew the truth. No one could save the invaders now. They had not just picked the wrong world. They had picked the one world everyone else was too afraid to provoke. A projection flickered to life in the center of the chamber, a live feed of Earth's orbit. The once dominant fleet was nothing but debris, slowly drifting in a glowing cloud. In its place, human warships now floated like silent predators, their hulls black, their lights cold and sharp. They did not fly victory banners. They did not broadcast victory speeches. They just floated there, still and unshakable. A wall of iron and fury staring into the stars. And every counselor in that chamber felt it deep in their bones. This was not a people that needed permission to survive. This was a people that would burn anyone who tried to take it away from them. On the ground, the last alien holdouts sent desperate distress calls to their fleet, but their fleet no longer existed. Strike teams surrounded them from all sides. One alien commander, blood on his hands, screamed into his comm. There were supposed to be 8 billion civilians. Where are they? Where are the armies? How are we losing to ghosts? But no one answered him, because the ghosts were already inside his walls. Minutes later, his command post went dark. The Council had watched invasions before. They had watched worlds burn. But what terrified them wasn't the destruction of the alien fleet. It was how quiet humanity had done it. No endless shouting, no political speeches, no desperate calls for help. Just silence. Cold, surgical silence. And the Council realized something they should have known a long time ago. Humans didn't show their full strength until they were forced to. On the flagship's ruined bridge, the alien admiral dropped to his knees as the screens around him flickered and died. The last thing he saw before the power went out completely was the shape of Earth's warships locking onto the wreckage of his fleet. He whispered one final, broken word in his language, a word that meant monster. And then the flagship disappeared in a burst of light. Back in the council chamber, the old counselor finally spoke after hours of silence, his voice low, like a man who had seen the future and didn't like it. They let us believe they were weak, he said. They let everyone believe it. And we all believed it. Until now. No one replied. The younger counselors looked at the screen where human warships hovered in formation like a wall of judgment. Earth had won. But it wasn't just a victory. It was a warning. The Council knew the galaxy had changed forever. For centuries they had whispered about humanity like it was a problem to be contained, something loud and chaotic but manageable. Now they understood they had never been dealing with a child among stars. They had been living next to a sleeping beast. And the beast wasn't sleeping anymore. In the cold quiet of space, Earth's fleet didn't celebrate. It just watched. Waiting. The Council didn't need to hear a single word. They already understood the message. Humanity would never kneel. Not to them. Not to anyone. And from that day on, the galaxy would remember the invasion not as the day Earth fell, but as the day Earth answered.